Is the pill bad for you? Whenever I'm on TikTok, someone's talking about how they came off birth control because it, quote, makes you infertile, depressed, or it makes you fat and bisexual. Oh, the horror. According to NHS data, prescriptions for the contraceptive pill in England dropped 56% between 2014 and 2021, which isn't much time, a massive cultural shift in just 7 years. But that's including the pandemic, and we'll get into why that's important later. And it's not just the pill. Overall, hormonal contraceptives have seen a consistent decline of roughly 24% in those 7 years. This is a global trend for young women. According to the KFF, an American not-for-profit health policy group, 14% of women between the ages of 18 and 25 said they made a change to their birth control or had thought about making a change because of something they saw online. And I'm seeing it too. Whether it's more ads promoting apps that track your menstrual cycle or Elon Musk randomly tweeting that hormonal birth control doubles your risk of depression, or it's Trump's Secretary of Health, RFK Jr., anti-vaxxer and worm-brained conspiracy theorists trying to get women to come off birth control and become Christian baby-making machines. But here's the kicker. The pill does kind of suck, and the hormonal contraception options for women just aren't good enough. Nor is the amount of funding and research into women's health. But how do you seek help, criticize it, or come off it without falling down the crunchy, conservative wellness pipeline? I'm lilyofarrell, and this is No Worries If Not, a podcast about women and internet culture. The anti-pill pipeline. If you're a woman under, say, 40, it's very likely these are the sorts of videos you've been getting in your feed. It starts with a kind of normal-looking discussion on the side effects of the pill, but it very quickly escalates to a woman walking through the woods with a daisy chain on her head talking about divine feminine energy. But before we get into why this is happening, I want to give you a brief rundown of the pill and its history. When was it introduced in the UK and how it's revolutionized women's lives? So hormonal contraception includes the pill, but it also includes the hormonal coil or the IUD, the implant, the patch, the injection, and the ring. And these work by releasing a synthetic version of estrogen and or progesterone that prevents pregnancy by stopping the ovaries from releasing the egg, or by thickening the cervical mucus or thinning the uterine lining. There are two types of pill, the combined pill and the mini pill. The combined pill has both hormones, the mini pill has just progesterone. So the pill was the first type of widely available hormonal contraception. It's over 99% effective when used properly, and it's estimated that about 70% of all women in Britain have used the pill at some stage in their lives, which is huge. It's been called the greatest scientific invention of the 20th century, and rightly so. In the UK in the 1950s, only 35% of women were working. Now it's over 72% of women. The pill gave women the freedom to get an education, work, travel, and to not have to marry young because of pregnancy. It was introduced in the UK in 1961, but it wasn't the overnight boom that people often assume it was. The government didn't want to look like they were encouraging promiscuity or aligning with the free love movement of the 60s. So doctors would only prescribe it to married women who had had children already and didn't want any more. You can literally go to your doctor and ask for the pill and they could say, nah, I'm not going to give it to you just because you don't have enough kids yet. Or you only have one kid, so maybe have another. Can you imagine? It wasn't until the 70s that family planning clinics could prescribe the pill to unmarried and, God forbid, childless women. That was when things really changed. So it was a really long process, and without the pill, we wouldn't be able to be where we are now. We'd probably both be at home churning butter with one hand and holding a baby locked to our nipple with the other, which is actually what a lot of people are advocating for women, but we'll get to that later. If you're a millennial woman, it's very likely you went on the pill as a teenager or young adult, not just for contraception, but because the hormones can help with cramps, acne, and PMS. And we all remember opening up the box and pulling out the side effects sheet, which is the size of a fucking 8-man tent. But it's so big because it lists all the side effects from common to rare and extremely rare. So instead of reading you the entire leaflet, we'd be here forever, I'm going to read you the NHS summary of the side effects for both pills. I'm doing this because we're going to get into loads of online misinformation about the pill later, so I feel like it's good to have this clear from the outset. So, according to the NHS, taking the pill can slightly increase your risk of getting breast cancer and cervical cancer, but the risk goes back to normal 10 years after you stop taking the pill. Taking it can also lower your risk of getting uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, and bowel cancer. It can cause high blood pressure in a small number of people. Some people report headaches, feeling sick or dizzy, and sore breasts, but there is not enough evidence to say whether this is caused by the pill. There is no evidence that taking the pill makes you put on weight or changes your sex drive. There is a slight chance of ovarian cysts. These aren't dangerous but can cause pelvic pain. The risk of getting a blood clot is very small and affects up to 1 in 1,000 people. When you stop taking the pill, your fertility usually returns to normal levels after about a month. There we go. So I feel like I'm in a good position to talk about this subject because unlike most content you see online about the pill, my thoughts on it are nuanced. Over the last 15 years or so, I've tried 5 different pills, ranging from combined to the mini pill, and I've also tried the coil, and they just haven't worked for me. I found the side effects to be too extreme, like sickness, and then the pain of the coil every single day was too much. And I'm not alone in my experience. About a third of women on the pill stop taking it in the first year, and there's still no hormonal contraception for men. In 2011, a male contraceptive trial was halted when it emerged that side effects like mood swings were too much for the men to handle. Shame. I'm not on hormonal contraception right now. Instead, I track my cycle. I wear an Oura ring because I always forget to take my temperature in the morning, and honestly, I don't know how I feel about it. I do sometimes feel like I'm being constantly surveyed. As reproductive rights are rolled back in the US, I worry what this would look like in the UK with a right-wing reform government. Since Roe v. Wade was overturned, even more anti-choice legislation has come into effect, and women in America are tracking their periods on paper, not digitally. Because in states like Texas, you can take someone to court for getting an abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, and you can get a $10,000 reward. It's called the Heartbeat Act. Or there's the Texas House Bill 7 that just came in last year, where if you successfully sue someone who manufactures, distributes, and prescribes abortion pills, you can get up to $100,000 in rewards. So if I missed a period and that was logged on my app, that's data that can be used against me. The thing is, I would really like to be on hormonal contraception, but the current options available just aren't good enough. So in an era where we are having conversations every day about robots taking over the world, why isn't contraception improving fast enough? When you just touch the surface of research on women's health, the phrase you see time and time again is not enough research, we don't know, inconclusive. Women's health is so underfunded, despite the fact that 50% of the world's population menstruate, go through the menopause, and 1 in 10 people in the UK have menstrual diseases like endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS. According to Endometriosis UK, there are over 1.5 million people in the UK with the disease, and it costs the UK economy $8.2 billion a year, but there's no known cure. There's limited research on it, and it's not properly funded because we are expected to always be in pain, and it's just not seen as important enough. You know what is, though? Erectile dysfunction. It gets a hell of a lot more funding for research than endometriosis does. Quelle surprise. Whenever I talk about women's health, I feel like Toni Collette in Hereditary.
Because nobody admits anything they've done!
So that's where we're at. And since the widespread mistrust of medical systems born out of the 2020 pandemic, we've been increasingly seeing more and more anti-pill propaganda from TikTok all the way to the White House. So the far-right content creators of the Weaponosphere have claimed the following about the pill. I've compiled a list, strap in. The pill is like putting poison in your body. It damages teenagers' brains. It causes infertility. It alters your sexuality, e.g. makes you bi or gay. The pill makes you more masculine, meaning men won't like you. It makes it harder to lean into your so-called feminine energy. Or it makes you more attracted to feminine men. Honestly, goals, get me on that damn pill. Overall, I would say the far-right's worst nightmare is a woman who is fat, gay, and who has loads of sex. And to that I say, cheers. You go get 'em, girl.
Good for her.
Obviously, those side effects listed are completely untrue, and in reference to that claim about infertility, which I see all the time online, the NHS says that you can get pregnant just a few weeks after you stop taking the pill, so it's totally false. Some of these videos, though, aren't always so extreme, and they might pull you in because they seem pretty reasonable. Maybe they're just talking about the side effects of the pill. But these creators aren't fighting for what we want, which is more funding and research into our reproductive rights. Instead, they're turning their back on all of it, embracing a soft feminine life with taglines like, "My empowering 100% hormone-free lifestyle." But thankfully, there's a book about exactly this. Lois Shearing published Pink Pilled, Women and the Far Right last year, and it's fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. And it has loads in it about the anti-pill propaganda.
My name is Lois Shearing. I'm an author and a journalist. I wrote a couple of books and edited a couple of books about bisexuality. And then for some reason, I decided I was done writing about bisexuality. And I wrote a book called Pink Pilled, Women and the Far Right, which was a book exploring how women are radicalized online. I expand the definition a little bit to sort of use it to refer to the ways in which women are kind of radicalized online into white supremacist and far right communities. When I was a teenager, I grew up very rurally and I was a very online person. And I sort of got very sucked into manosphere blogs. Well, yeah, manosphere blogs back in the day. It looked very different to the manosphere now. But I wasn't like consuming that content because I agreed with it or because I liked it. I was consuming it as a kind of almost like a form of digital self-harm. It was like there was all these things that I didn't like about myself. I didn't like that I was queer. I didn't like that I was a woman. Turns out I'm not a woman, but at the time I wasn't comfortable with that. You know, I didn't like all of these things about myself. And there was this part of the internet where everyone just sort of agreed with me that I was a horrible, disgusting person. And when you're like a teenager really struggling with your identity, I just kept going back to it. It was like a scab that I just like kept picking. And so I felt very intimately aware of the process of like the sort of digital radicalization that people were talking about in terms of men and boys. But I hadn't seen as much conversation around women in those communities. And I was seeing more and more content in that kind of digisphere made by women and targeted at women. The video that I talk about at the start of Pink Pilled is when the video How to Wear Makeup in a God-Honoring Way went viral. And everyone was like taking the piss out of it and turning it into a meme.
Here's the video. It's from a Christian account called Girl Defined, and it was posted on YouTube in 2015.
Hey guys, it's Kristen and Bethany here with Girl Defined Ministries, and in today's vlog, we're going to be sharing with you something fun and practical: how to wear makeup in a God-honoring way. So there isn't one specific verse that talks directly about makeup, but there are a lot of verses that talk about our design as women and then our design as Christians and how we can best honor God in our lives. So the verse that we've really looked at and that we're going to look at today really quickly comes from 1 Timothy 2:9-10. And this is something I'm sure you've all heard, but just listen up because the context is really interesting. It says, "Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works."
And then I sort of ended up doing some research into Girl Defined and their actual beliefs. And it felt very similar to the process I'd seen of these videos aimed at men and boys, what's called forward-facing media in the literature around it, where it's kind of like a more palatable version of their ideology and their beliefs. And then you follow it to their backwards-facing or inward-facing media, and you see a lot more of their beliefs more openly. So I was sort of looking through Girl Defined's content, and they're very evangelical Christians, they're very homophobic, they're very Islamophobic, they're very transphobic. And I was kind of like, oh, this is the same process to what I've seen happening with these boys in the manosphere. And it was around that time where I moved to London and I started getting involved in a little bit of like street anti-fascism, going to countering Tommy Robinson demonstrations and stuff. And I was seeing more and more women in the crowd. And I kept being like, what are you guys doing over there? You should be over here with us. Like it really didn't make sense to me. And I think those sort of two things happening at the same time, I linked them together and was like, oh, I wonder if this content that I'm seeing constantly aimed at women and these women here in the streets, I wonder if there's a link there. So that's when I started looking into it.
In the last episode, Thin and Right Wing, we looked at the wellness industry and its relationship to the far right. This is something that comes up even more so in anti-pill content. In Lois's book, they use some great terms like crunchy far right, which refers to the far right's anti-vax conspiracies and their obsession with pure, all-natural foods like raw milk. And Lois also writes about conspirituality, which is where conspiracies meet spirituality.
Basically, it is like the convergence of conspiracism and spirituality. So it's like the very wooey, conspiracy-minded people. You know, the roots of the term are in anti-vax communities, particularly QAnon, where it's like big pharma is evil and out to get you, and what's better for you is living by nature, and your body knows how to look after itself. So that is a rough overview of conspirituality.
Something that comes up a lot in the anti-pill side of the internet is your femininity. These videos are usually how-to guides about stepping into your so-called divine feminine or dark feminine, and usually the goal is to attract a man, obviously. And typically, most of these videos will promote submissiveness, and they'll play into bioessentialist ideas that come up in far-right content all the time. I asked Lois to describe a typical divine feminine or dark feminine video.
I feel like there's a slight difference between like dark femininity and divine femininity. So dark femininity, she's the office siren. She's white, obviously. She's using her feminine wiles to get what she wants. She's playing the game. She's playing the patriarchy. That she's kind of playing into the patriarchy we don't want to talk about. Whereas the divine feminine, those typical videos tend to have like tips on how to step into your divine feminine, which basically means like how to be softer, how to be more submissive, how to be more malleable. I think a lot of it comes from this idea of biblical womanhood, but people have stripped out the biblical side of it because that feels a bit too Christian and added this more spiritual, divine feminine element. Or sometimes people just say like stepping into your femininity, which I will get back to the question, but as a queer person, pisses me off because all of the femmes I know are like the coolest, most hardcore people who are amazing, who are not being submissive or like gentle or delicate. You know, femme is a protective identity. And so to watch people talk about like, oh, step into your feminine by being delicate and submissive is very annoying. But I think the typical videos would have tips about like how to step into your divine feminine by, you know, choosing the right perfume or like letting your man make decisions for you or being more in touch with your cycle or learning to stay home more or saying no.
The thing about anti-pill content is you never see someone go, I came off the pill, I've got back in touch with my natural cycle, and now I can lift these really heavy weights. Or now I have the energy to go to the club and dance all night. Or now I can chase my career goals. Instead, it's always, now I'm in touch with my natural cycle and I'm more feminine. I'm staying at home, having babies on a bale of hay. I'm soft, I'm passive, I'm a trad wife to be.
I've seen a lot of videos that are like, how to build your soft life by stepping into your divine feminine. And it's basically like, oh, so you've stopped going outside. That's what being a divine feminine is. And I think an important aspect of like tradwifery and divine femininity and biblical womanhood is a withdrawal from public life. It's like an isolationist identity wherein women are trying to like opt out of patriarchy and opt out of misogyny by withdrawing into themselves, withdrawing into their home, and like making this trade-off. Oh, this is the one I definitely wanted to talk to you about. Syncing your workout to your cycle, where it's like, if you're in this phase of your cycle, you should only be working out light. Or if you're in your luteal phase, you should be doing blah, blah, blah. This is bullshit, right? This is nonsense. But I'm seeing so much of that, and it feels so anti-feminist and reactionary to me because they're trying to argue it from a feminist perspective of, yes, women's bodies or bodies that menstruate are overlooked in medical research and fitness research. But this idea that like a body that menstruates is so inherently different and ruled by its menstruation that you need to be like planning your workout or your exercise around it. It feels very much like it's leading to this idea of women are less suited to hard labor because it's not good for their cycles. And if you want to live a soft life, you should be living in harmony with your cycle. And that means like not doing really hard work at certain points of your cycle. And that just feels so against decades of feminist arguing of like women and people who menstruate are just as capable of like working and being active participants in society. I'm seeing that, and it seems to again lead back to this like to be a woman is to be dainty and soft and a swing back away from strong is the new sexy that we were seeing a couple of years ago. So I think that's like an emerging pipeline that we should all be aware of. And then obviously anti-vax is always a big one, but I feel like that's well trodden I don't need to go into that too much.
Lois said they have endometriosis. It's an incredibly painful disease, and for some people, it can limit their ability to work and socialize. And when there's no cure, and it takes an average of 9 years to get diagnosed in the UK, because so often you're told it's just painful periods, you can feel so isolated and alone. What do you do when the system fails you? You turn to the internet. In Doppelganger, one of my favorite books ever, Naomi Klein summarizes this so beautifully by saying, conspiracy theorists get the facts wrong, but often get the feelings right.
The trouble with the stuff around the pill is it can sound like you're making a feminist argument because it is so under-researched. It does have these really bad and negative side effects. And I think something I try to argue in the book is that at the heart of a lot of women's radicalization, their catalyst event or their red pill moment is like experiencing medical misogyny. And I think that's where a lot of wellness stuff comes from. When you are desperate and the medical institution can't help you or won't help you or is dismissing you, you do seek out alternatives. Pain makes you fucking feral. Natural birthing is such a big one at the moment because people have traumatic birth experiences because giving birth is traumatic, especially in the current way it's handled medically. Or they're trying to seek an endometriosis diagnosis and they experience medical misogyny, or they're put on the pill at 14 with no follow-up and they have horrible side effects, which happens to so many people. The heart of all of these is medical misogyny. The heart of a lot of them is medical misogyny. I have been like feral with pain and I'm like, I will do anything. I will take anything. You are vulnerable in those moments. And then if you have people saying, well, here's this really simple cure, you just have to get back to nature, you just have to get back to like your cycle and to being a real woman, I can totally see how appealing that is. But this idea that birthing should almost be like an orgasmic experience because they see the pinnacle of being a woman as giving birth and being a mother, and they see medical interventions and anything that messes with your hormones or abortion as making you like less feminine. Of course, the pinnacle moment of when you are at your most feminine, when you are most a woman, is when you're giving birth. And so if you're valorizing womanhood to that extent, you're obviously going to valorize this idea of completely natural, uninterfered with birthing.
Lois talks about natural birthing here, and this has become such a legitimate issue that The Guardian published a big expose about a group called the Free Birth Society. It's essentially an online cult that promotes free birth, meaning giving birth with no medical intervention, no painkillers, no doctors, and no midwives. It's a prime example of conspirituality because the society claims that mothers will have a deeper spiritual connection with their babies. It encourages a huge distrust in medical systems and Big Pharma, plus there's loads of crunchy wellness imagery of women in the woods wearing daisy chains. The Free Birth Society is a very extreme example of this, but in the wider motherhood culture, there is this badge of honor given to women who give birth without pain medication, like it's some kind of strength to aspire to or a spiritual plane that only mothers can reach. Childbirth is the only kind of pain we reward for enduring drug-free, and maybe that's because we expect women to just be in pain. When you go on the Free Birth Society website, it says, where women think for themselves and children are born free. And the problem is, women are turning to this movement in part because of medical misogyny. They've had traumatic birth experiences in hospitals and with doctors who dismissed them when they said something was wrong. But just like the far right, this is not a group with good intentions. Instead, it's weaponizing women's pain. The Free Birth Society has made over £13 million through its membership. And Ciaran Cale and Lucy Osborne, the journalists involved in this story, said they found 48 cases around the world of stillbirths, newborn deaths, or serious injuries where mothers had been influenced by the Free Birth Society's content. If anti-pill content has a spectrum, free birth content is the end point. It's still up and running and hasn't been deplatformed, which highlights how little people are aware of the failures in women's health. So, back to the anti-pill stuff. Influencers are being paid to promote cycle tracking apps like Natural Cycles or Flow, which is the app that went to court for sharing data with companies like Meta and Google without the user's consent. And to give you an idea of period tracking, it's where you log when you get your period, which tells you when you'll be ovulating and at your most fertile. This tends to be about 2 weeks before your next period. There are some other factors that tell you when your body is ovulating too, like your temperature increases. But it's risky. There are all sorts of reasons your temperature can be higher than normal in the morning, like if you're hungover or if you're unwell, and not everyone has a regular cycle, so it's not always accurate at tracking your ovulation window. If you don't follow the instructions exactly to a T, it is only 76% effective. This means 24 in every 100 women will get pregnant when tracking their fertility for a year. But there's a new period tracking app on the block. Her name is 28, because your cycle is 28 days long. And guess who founded this app? Brittany Hugo Boom, founder of right-wing women's magazine Evie, also known as Conservative Cosmo. We talked about this magazine in the last episode, Thin and Right Wing, and they did a whole cover on thinfluencer Liv Schmidt and a bunch of tradwife influencers. I fear Evie magazine is going to become a regular guest in this series. Every way you turn in the womanosphere, it takes you back to Evie. It's like a terrifying feminine labyrinth made out of raw milk. Evie magazine is heavily promoting pronatalism. One of their ads says, "Be a rebel, start a family." And under the health section of their site, they have a whole subsection dedicated to fertility and birth control. Some of the articles are, "I almost died from my birth control. 13 reasons you should quit hormonal birth control." And this one is my personal favorite. "Want your husband to get you pregnant? Cook him these 10 dishes. I would rather sit on a rusty nail," truly. So it's no surprise that Brittany Hugo Boom, the founder of both the 28 tracking app and Evie magazine, is combining both, using her magazine to promote her app. In a New York Times interview, she said, "I think more women want a soft life, a beautiful life, than feeling all this pressure to do all these things. The damn soft life, they're obsessed with it." On the 28 website, there are loads of images of women wandering through forests and bathing in waterfalls as they reconnect with nature. And side note, Brittany Hugo Boom also owns sundress.co, which carries the iconic milkmaid dress, again with the obsession with milk. You couldn't write it. She is at the center of the tradwife cinematic universe. Here's a quote from an article from Evie magazine promoting the 28 tracking app. 28 is at the heart of the movement to lead women towards happier, healthier lives, to destigmatize and demystify menstrual health by empowering women to embrace their nature, not fight against it. It's a call to reclaim control of our bodies in the most natural way possible. If your cycle is your compass, then 28 is your path to healthy hormones and a beautiful feminine physique. It goes on to say, taking oral birth control can alter the physical structure of your brain. The pill can change who you pick for a long-term partner. It could be drawing you to genetically incompatible mate without you even knowing it. It's been argued that the pill enables men to be non-committal in ways they previously weren't able to because of pregnancy, and helps contribute to the current hookup culture we see today. The more partners women have, the more likely they are to be depressed and also report a lower satisfaction with life. Birth control has allowed women to gain sexual liberation, yet this may have led to more damage than anyone could have anticipated. Coming off the pill was one of the best decisions I have made. Bring back sluts. Please, sluts, we need you now more than ever. My body count is higher than my age, and let me tell you, I'm doing just fine. So the 28 app not only tracks your cycle, but it also claims to offer nutritional advice and wellness suggestions. No joke, it recommends you grass-fed butter during the luteal phase. I feel like this app should pair up with Ballerina Farm, where you get a discount on her poo particle raw milk delivered straight to your door. Of course, 28 sells a supplement too. It's called Toxic Breakup, the Birth Control Detox. It claims to reset your natural cycle after you come off birth control. Another big focus of the 28 app is endometriosis and PCOS. And this is a prime example of how the far right are so good at swooping in when the system fails people. They'll say, if you can't get a job, it's because of immigrants. If you're a lonely man, it's because feminism has gone too far. And if doctors aren't listening to your menstrual pain, get this app and just get pregnant instead. The app is backed by, surprise, surprise, billionaire Peter Thiel. He's the Babadook who co-founded PayPal, and he's a mega donor of the Republicans and a big Trump supporter. Brittany Hugo Boom said in her New York Times interview that she got Peter Thiel's investment by pitching the app to him as a solution to the fertility crisis. So yeah, the writing is very much on the wall. It's written in all natural hormone-free period blood. Emily Amick, the author of Democracy in Retrograde, said that Democrats need to take Evie seriously in what she calls the conservative girly pop ecosystem. Media outlets like Evie are targeting moderate, apolitical, exhausted women who are broken down by the lack of medical support. She says, by weaving identity politics and conservative values into lifestyle and wellness content, the right has been able to capture a cohort of women voters that the left never dreamed they could lose. And Trump is really relevant here because, as always, women's bodies are political and the far right is stripping reproductive rights, and this is obvious in its rollback of Roe v. Wade, but there are smaller micro things happening too, like anti-pill propaganda. Trump hired Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his Secretary of Health in 2024. He is the anti-vaxxer and conspiracy theorist I mentioned at the beginning, and his slogan is Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA for short. A while ago, I came across this fantastic content creator called Kate Glavin on Instagram. She runs a meme page and has a podcast called CMOS Girlies, and she breaks down the wellness BS and the MAHA movement so well. I saw a video of her lifting weights and the caption said, "They want you thin and weak, get strong instead." And I was like, fuck yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Glavin. I am a content creator and also the podcast host of CMOS Girlies, which is a health and wellness meme page that's focusing on the wellness industry, how it profits off of women. And I would say it's analyzing the wellness industry, both from like a sociological and political perspective, because I feel like that oftentimes that perspective is very lacking in the wellness industry. Oftentimes it's just riddled with like, go buy this supplement, go do this diet, instead of looking at the reasons why women are participating in certain trends or why people are really seeking out these alternative modes of care versus going to their doctor. So I feel like my role is kind of doing these explainer videos across social about why these things are happening, you know, where the lack of analysis is as it relates to like income inequality, lack of accessibility, and also like a lot of the far right stuff that is coming through our algorithms. A lot of people talk about these alt-right pipelines and they're very prominent in the wellness space. So that's kind of become my beat over the past few years.
If you're not at all clocked into American politics, do not worry. Kate has you covered. I asked her to give us an insight into the MAHA movement.
And the MAHA movement in the US is this thing called Make America Healthy Again, kind of spearheaded by RFK Jr., who now is running the HHS in the US, who controls like $1 trillion budget that relates to healthcare spending. It's a huge chunk of not only the entire federal budget, but also the whole economy. And he is a huge anti-vaxxer, doesn't believe in science. He's laying off career staffers, cutting funding to cancer research, women's health research. So there's just a lot of chaos happening. And the best way I would describe it is like 3 years ago, people would say, you know, I'm drinking raw milk, I don't trust vaccines. And you're like, okay, you're kind of sitting over here, that's a little bit crazy, whatever. But now those people are at the top of the food chain in the US, controlling public policy and legislating on these issues. So it feels much more pertinent to talk about it and just to have left-leaning voices in the wellness space. So the MAHA movement is something that is focusing on, I would say, chronic illness in the United States and the food system. The biggest group that supports MAHA is moms, which once you get into it makes a lot of sense because moms, of course, are thinking about their children. They're thinking about what vaccines to give my kid. They're going to a lot of doctor's appointments with their pediatrician. They're probably, because of gender roles, buying the food for their kids' lunches. So they have to be, you know, if they care about their child's health, they're going to be looking at the ingredients of the food. So it makes sense that moms are much more preoccupied and buying into this MAHA movement than men are.
So you know how I use the term crunchy far right? Well, the MAHA mums, RFK Jr.'s biggest supporters, will often call themselves crunchy mums. Remember years ago when there was this big panic about E-numbers and blue M&Ms? MAHA crunchy mums are a bit like that, but there's the added element of far right conspiracies. Like they might say that chemicals in tap water can affect your child's gender identity and or sexuality. That's an actual theory RFK Jr. has said, by the way, worm-brained. Here's a quote from an article in The Times about MAHA mums. Mothers in particular have become its fiercest evangelists online, whether they post videos explaining their politics while cooking dinner or resting a swaddled baby in their arms. Some people claim MAHA is a feminist movement, as it's women feeling empowered to fight for the health of their children. From the crunchy granola, think unmedicated birth, cloth nappies, and breastfeeding through the toddler years, to users trading information and in some cases misinformation about the potentially harmful ingredients in household items ranging from nappies to cereal to sun cream to baby food. And just like what Lois pointed out, Kate said this world focuses heavily on the individual.
I think the right-wing stuff, kind of what I tell people to look out for, and we spoke about this earlier, is that it's coded with individual responsibility, that it's on you to go out and buy this thing. It's also uses a lot of consumerism, but a lot of the rhetoric is loaded with like Margaret Thatcher, Reagan ideology, where it's like, you need to buy the right vegetables and you need to do the right workout and you need to make sure you're getting this food that doesn't have pesticides in it or toxins. And it's also created a conspiracy of the government. Like big pharma is trying to kill you. The CDC is trying to ruin your kid's life and give your kid all of these diseases. So it's sowing distrust in science and medicine, being very anti-vax. And they try to make you buy something as like cures to your problems without really knowing you at all. And I think for women, we are much more susceptible to this because most of us have had bad experiences navigating health problems because we know that so little research is actually like done on women and it's not funded by the government and it's too hard to do clinical trials on women. But I think like it definitely tries to play into a lot of fear and paranoia that women may have. And it kind of sells you a sweet solution at the end of the video. So it's been a very bizarre movement to kind of watch unfurl. And it's also frustrating because there's a little bit of validity to the things that these people are saying. Yes, big pharma is an issue in the United States because having a for-profit healthcare system is bad. I agree with you on that. But defunding the whole government doesn't solve the problem there. You know, once COVID started, I will say, you look at there are studies around the world that there was a huge decline in trust in medicine, in doctors, in public health institutions. So I think that was definitely a spearheaded point for people to start following all of these fringe ideologies. Like definitely that point, I was like, wow, a lot of people are now scared of vaccines and drinking raw milk. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, now these people are actually in government. So it feels like it's much bigger of a threat to people's public health. I would say once I started to take care of my own personal well-being, I felt a lot of limitations to like the opportunity to be healthy. It is so expensive in the US to go out and buy organic local produce. I lived in New York City for 7 years, and one of the bigger farmers markets in New York, the Union Square Green Market, open on the weekends. You can get eggs and honey and meat and everything from local farmers. I could not afford to buy all of my groceries there. I wanted to in a dream world.
Kate's right. Being healthy is so expensive. And she also told me, I didn't know this, that there aren't regulations on supplements in the US. Like anyone can launch a supplement line, which makes so much sense because all the psycho alpha red pill bros are always pushing their dodgy pills on their podcasts. If I lived in the US, I could launch a supplement line called Endo Be Gone. It would be pink, obviously. I would sell it for $20 and I'd put it on Instagram and I could say it helps endometriosis pain. Kate lives in London now and said she's noticed how we don't consume supplements as much as the US.
I think because, and this is my general thesis, because the US doesn't have universal health care, I think that's why the MAHA movement is so successful there, because people don't have their basic needs met. They are more willing to go into these fringe things that they see on the internet. What I've noticed from just kind of going around to different health shops is that people are not buying supplements in the same way that people are in the US. People are maybe buying one or two things that they've read about or their doctors recommended to them, but they don't have these like crazy supplement pantries. And they're not like biohacking their way to good health because they do have their basic needs met. So I found that to be interesting, that like the supplement industry is so much more bloated and crazy and unregulated than it is here in the UK.
Supplements are such a big thing for women, and conservatives especially. In The Secret Life of Mormon Wives, Macy, one of the stars, has her own supplement line called Every Mama, described as a comprehensive women's reproductive health and fertility multivitamin. Containing our Mama Mix, Every Mama is science-backed to supply you with the essential nutrients critical to every phase of the mamahood journey, all the way from conception to the delivery room. I feel like just making this episode is going to get me pregnant. I asked Kate about what she thinks about the anti-pill content she's been seeing.
The biggest one that I see a lot is get in touch with your natural femininity or something to that degree. Like getting on birth control is making you out of touch with who you really are. that is a conservative dog whistle. Like that is wrapped in the politics of Trump and, you know, all the evangelicals that want women to just be vessels for children. It's like very bioessentialist that your role is like just to have a period and like have kids. So that definitely is a dog whistle for me that I see. I think it's interesting to watch all of this language try to like convince women that if you're a woman the right way and you're in your divine feminine, like you're going to be able to be successful and have this beautiful life. But in reality, there's like structural issues that should be fixed versus, I don't know, focusing on if we're in our divine feminine or not, whatever the hell that even means. But I've seen a lot of videos that are very anti-birth control from women that are like, you know, I got really fat off of birth control, or I had this awful headache, or I had brain fog or something. It's actually awful to see how much fat phobia comes up in these conversations about birth control. Birth control made me fat. And it's like, well, you could be pregnant and you don't want that. That could be worse for you. Like I would take being fat any day over being pregnant right now. I don't fucking want that. And you'll go to the comment section and it's like fairly young women, because I think a lot of people when they make videos like forget that there are 13-year-olds on TikTok. You know, I feel like sometimes I often forget that. I think everyone is like in their 20s, their brains developed, but you are influencing people who actually like may not have even had their period yet, right? So I think making sweeping language about like birth control is bad is dangerous, because we know in the US that a lot of women are losing access to these things, and birth control is the most effective way to not get pregnant, especially when abortion access is getting stripped away.
Like me and Lois, Kate had also seen some anti-pill content claiming that you should be eating certain foods or not socializing or exercising at different points in your cycle.
And so I think the cycle syncing stuff, I don't know how much like medical validity there is to eating different things throughout your cycle. Also, who the fuck can afford to do that? I briefly thought about doing that when I was like 22. And then I'm like, I'm not going to eat beets on like the second week of my cycle. Like, I'm not going to grocery shop differently. If I'm eating out with a friend, am I going to be like, oh, I can't eat here? They don't have broccoli. Like, I can't eat here. It's ruining my life. It's very bizarre. And I also really take issue with the bioessentialism, once again, that comes with the cycle syncing by telling women that you should just lay down during your luteal phase and do nothing. And of course, it's true that your hormones do fluctuate throughout your cycle. I think women having that knowledge is great, but it also creates limitations on what women can do. You know, as someone who marathon trains and trains the exact same throughout my cycle, if I don't sleep well, I'm going to perform poorly too. If I'm not eating properly, eating enough, eating the right nutrients, I'm going to feel like shit too. If I'm not stretching, I'm going to feel like shit too. So I think it's very interesting to really think about the ways that this rhetoric is really limiting women's potential, especially as it relates to fitness.
Part of the Make America Healthy Again campaign is promoting restorative reproductive medicine, or RRM, which is trying to get pregnant without IVF. A lot of anti-abortion conservatives hate IVF because it can create unused embryos, which goes against their scientifically incorrect belief that life begins at conception. RRM instead focuses on, you guessed it, naturally tracking your menstrual cycle. And this is something that Trump's government is actively pushing. One of the poster girls for the MAHA movement is Alex Clark. She hosts a wellness podcast called Culture Apothecary, and she calls her predominantly women fan base cute conservatives VOM. VOM. Alex is part of Turning Point USA, which is the far-right organization set up by Charlie Kirk. And like many other crunchy influencers, she took off during the pandemic. Her main mission is to get women off the pill. She literally said, I'm on a mission to get young women off the pill. She even sells stickers that say, birth control, we're done. She calls it poison, and during a recent episode, she said, the pill accelerates aging, which is obviously insane. Like the rest of the MAHA movement, she promotes natural family planning, and when challenged, she very sneakily says, it's not very feminist to think that women are too stupid to know how our cycles work and be able to avoid pregnancy naturally. There's a piece on her in the Washington Post by Cara Vogt that summarizes the crunchy far-right aesthetic really well. It says, in another era, you might peg Clark as some kind of hippie liberal, maybe out in 1970s Berkeley, California, planting an organic garden and humming along to Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi. But in the replanted political garden of 2024, Clark is a modern woman of the right, a leading light of Make America Healthy Again, the crunchy conservative sub-brand of Donald Trump's MAGA campaign. To listen to Culture Apothecary is to enter a fundamentally conservative realm. Heterosexual marriages take primacy. Motherhood is vaunted. Daycare is dangerous. Feminism is insidious. Hormonal birth control is a scourge. And the women's liberation movement is understood to have done more harm than good. And as the saying goes, when America sneezes, the UK catches a cold. So I was like, who is our UK equivalent? Who is a popular podcast host who frequently peddles health misinformation and conservative gender roles?
I'm Stephen Bartlett and we are here at Flight Story HQ in central London. I'm an investor, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm the host of the Diary of a CEO podcast.
I can't believe it's taken me this long to talk about this fucking guy, Pound Shop Joe Rogan. I realise he is not far right. I need to acknowledge that. But some of the misinformation, guests, and ideologies he promotes are about as unregulated as an American supplement line and are absolutely far-right adjacent. Last year, he had Sarah Hill as a guest, writer of the best-selling book, How the Pill Changes Everything. And the clips he pushes out have titles like, Birth Control Changes Who You Are, and Would You Still Love Him If You Came Off the Pill? Sarah's book has done really well, but I think she's sus. She leads a research lab at a Christian university in Texas. She's spoken at MAHA events. She has a Heritage Foundation quote on her website. This is the conservative think tank influencing Trump's policymaking. And she went on Alex Clark's Mental podcast. In the episode, she says women should come off the pill if they're looking for a long-term partner because the pill influences who you're attracted to, which is such BS and feels like a really weird way to try to get women to have more babies. She says the pill limits sexual function and that it fundamentally changes women's biology and psychology. None of this has been scientifically proven. Also, the freakiest thing is she calls women choosing to remain single the mating crisis, like we're endangered pandas. But the so-called mating crisis isn't the fault of the pill. It's a sign of social progress. Women no longer have to depend on men financially. So now we're not trapped in abusive and violent relationships or just shitty, unfulfilling ones. We can work, travel, own property, and get a bank account without a husband. And thanks to the freedom the pill has given us, we can do it all without getting pregnant. But the trouble is, like all of these crunchy writers, politicians, and content creators I've talked about in this episode, she has a nugget of truth at the center, which hooks you in. Women have been failed by medical misogyny, and there's a big hole in research and funding into women's health. I have cried in so many doctor's appointments as they said, just give it another 3 months, and I have to choose between debilitating menstrual cramps or going on the pill and hating it. If I didn't know the wider political and social agenda behind the anti-pill movement, I could have easily bought into all of this. And before long, I'd be a paid subscriber of Evie magazine, wearing my milkmaid dress, logging my period on 28, and being a divine feminine influencer. There's still time. When I spoke to Lois, author of Pink Pilled, and Kate Glavin of CMOS Girlies, I asked them both, what do you do when a woman you know is aligning herself with far-right movements that seek to harm her? Where her fatigue for medical misogyny and contraceptive options has driven her to the crunchy far right of the wellness world. Here's Kate's advice.
Yeah, it's a tricky one with friends kind of falling down these pipelines and watching it and not knowing if you should step in. I think it's important with your friend to affirm the health issues that they're going through because health issues can be very isolating. All of your friends want to go out, do one thing, and maybe you're experiencing chronic illness and you're working through it and you can't go and do that. Like, how do you bring that up, have those conversations with your friends without kind of alienating yourself socially from people? I think it's important for women to, be that kind of advocate for your own health because there is a lot of medical misogyny. But I think as soon as it starts to get in like, you don't trust doctors, science, research, you don't trust your friends, I think that's kind of a scary tension point where I feel like people need to be reeled in. The reasons that we're having bad issues with birth control is because we don't fund women's health research. So that should be the thing that you're fighting for if you have had a bad experience with birth control, instead of taking to the internet and be like, I hate birth control. Like, I want to see you advocating for that from your legislators, right? I want to see you advocating for that on like a policy level. So I think in the healthcare system, you do have to be an advocate for yourself. It is really challenging. It's very taxing, but I think it's a dangerous game when it starts to like sow distrust in medicine and doctors. Like, your opinion should be that, you can, I guess the advice I would say is that you should seek out all these options for yourself, but still fight for other women to have access to contraceptive care. Even if you don't want to be on birth control, make sure that you're not taking away the right for other women to have access to that.
This is exactly it. When women like me are criticizing our contraceptive options, I'm not campaigning for them to be taken away from me. I want more of them, more funding, more research, more options for everyone, not just women. More freedom and more choice. Here's Lois's advice.
I feel like listen to them first, because what I found really interesting about researching women who join these communities is that, unlike a lot of men who join these communities, these women have an actual pain point that's being exploited. Their pain is, like you said, medical misogyny. And I think listening to them and giving them a space where they can vent about those experiences and share those experiences with you and talk about endometriosis and PCOS and those kind of illnesses can make you is important. If you can, maybe connect them with other people in your life who have those illnesses. And also, at the end of the day, the pill is a medical miracle and should be celebrated as one of the most important medical breakthroughs in history, in the same way that we talk about tuberculosis injections and penicillin. The pill gave women and people who can get pregnant a freedom that did not exist in history before. And so I totally understand our frustrations. And I think our baseline has shifted, that a lot of us don't have people in our lives who remember life before the pill. Like, even my mother had access to the pill from teenage years. I think none of us can remember or have people in our life who went through life not being able to access the pill. And so we just take it for granted a little bit. I think just reading about and finding material about people's lives before contraception and the kind of things that like women and people who can get pregnant did can be really grounding and a really good way to just remind ourselves we deserve a pill that's better and we deserve hormonal contraception that works for us. But we're not going to get that by giving up on it. We deserve better hormonal contraception and we should demand that rather than just saying like the system's fucked, so let's all just get pregnant and be trad wives.
After learning all of this, anti-pill content is so transparent now. It promotes a hyper-individualistic distrust in institutions, a 1950s-style view on marriage and babies, and a far-right bioessentialist view on women's brains and biology. It encourages you to remove yourself from society and embrace the divine, feminine soft life instead. But embracing the soft life is not going to get us better reproductive rights. Like Lois said, we deserve better hormonal contraception, so let's demand that instead of becoming trad wives. And just like Kate said, even if you don't want to be on birth control, don't let women's fundamental right to access it be taken away. We can fight for more freedom, not fewer options. Thanks for tuning in to No Worries If Not. Thanks to our guests, Lois Shearing and Kate Glavin. The theme music was composed by Meg Jenkins. The titles were animated by Angelica Lena. The script editors were my mum, Jackie O'Farrell, and Will Hilton. Also produced by Will Hilton. No Worries If Not is produced, written, and hosted by me, Lily O'Farrell.